The Alliance. History. Alioth was colonized. The crucible in which the Alliance was forged was Alioth, a system so rich in gas and mineral resources that early surveyors... The Alliance. History. Alioth was colonized. The crucible in which the Alliance was forged was Alioth, a system so rich in gas and mineral resources that early surveyors considered it a stellar El Dorado. When the Federation established its first colony on Alioth 5b in 2452, they gave the planet the less grandiose name of Fruitcake, as mineral deposits lay in the loamy soils as abundantly as raisins in cake. Later, commentators would reflect, bitterly, that the world was well named because everyone wanted a piece. A conflict over mining rights drew in the superpowers. Alioth's prosperity soon attracted corporations eager to support the developing system in exchange for a share of the profits. A dispute over rights quickly escalated into an armed conflict, prompting the Empire to dispatch a military force, ostensibly for the colonists' protection. The Federation also sent ships, but theirs were a response to the corporation's plea for aid. Unable to directly engage the Federal ships without sparking a war, the Empire covertly encouraged the Alioth colonists to renounce the Federation and accept Imperial protection, thus freeing the Empire to engage with the occupying Federal forces in sympathy with the will of the people. This marked the first of many incidents in which the people of Alioth were used to advance the agenda of another power. Federation-sponsored insurrection. In 2530, the Federation set out to undermine Imperial control of Alioth by exploiting local resentment of the governor. They covertly supported acts of protest and petty vandalism. Then, when the inevitable Imperial crackdown followed, stoked the fires of social unrest. A terrorist movement called the Quakers emerged, and the atrocities escalated. The years that followed saw a protracted and degrading series of proxy wars and cynical propaganda campaigns as the Federal, Imperial, and corporate powers all contended for Alioth. The system made an abortive attempt to establish its independence in 2617, resulting in a short-lived cooperation between the Empire and the Federation, neither of which were willing to allow this. The Revolution. In the early 4th millennium, both the Federation and the Empire had a presence in the Alioth system. Fruitcake, now known as Gordonworld, was a federal protectorate, while the Empire had earlier conducted terraforming experiments on the world of New California and also held gas mining platforms in the system. The federal corporation supplying New California had raised the prices of their goods several times in the previous years, and when they imposed yet another price hike, the planet's inhabitants revolted. In the insurrection that followed, rebels commandeered any available ships and headed out to the gas mining platforms, where they attacked the outpost's corporate employees. Alarmed, the Empire and the Federation dispatched ships to put down the rebellion, but were beaten back by a hastily assembled force made up of fighters from Alioth and, crucially, volunteers from nearby independent systems. Neither the Empire nor the Federation were able to gain a foothold, and eventually both forces had to withdraw. The Empire faced too many logistical problems fighting so far from home, while the Federation's efforts were undermined by public sympathy for the rebels. An alliance was brokered. The victory in Alioth had proven that independent systems working together could hold their own against the superpowers. It fell to pilot Mick Turner and scientist Meredith Argent to ride the wave of public spirit and propose a permanent alliance under whose aegis independent systems could enjoy freedom from imperial and federal interference. The alliance was founded in 3230, and in the next 2 decades, it expanded its membership to more than 20 systems, some defecting from the Federation and the Empire, others pledging as independents. The Alliance. Society. Many worlds, few rules, no overlords. The Alliance's Articles of Membership are designed to unite the member systems with strong, straightforward bonds that allow as much self-determination as possible. Membership guarantees mutual prosperity through guaranteed free trade and security through the Alliance Defence Force, while leaving much of the business of government to the individual members. The Alliance Assembly acts as a central arbitration committee, helping to settle disputes between member systems. It also oversees formal arrangements between members, such as treaties, research goals, and mutually agreed policies. As no one system can be allowed to carry more weight than another, the Assembly frequently finds itself bogged down in endless back and forth negotiations. Getting them to agree on anything is a task often compared to herding linglangs, notoriously ill-tempered carnivores from the Achenar system. A body of civil servants who remain uninvolved in politics handle most of the day-to-day administrative work that enables the Alliance to function. Conditional autonomy for member systems. Alliance members are required to subscribe to and uphold a code of human rights, and to have a democratically elected government. Citizens of any member state have a right of freedom of movement and residence within any other member state. Furthermore, all member systems are obliged to give immediate military assistance to any fellow member when necessary. The Alliance. Military. The Alliance Defence Force. While each Alliance member system maintains its own navy, all members are required to commit ships and crew to the Alliance Defence Force. This rapid response group usually remains within Alliance space, and its tasks vary from providing a beleaguered system with military assistance to evacuating settlements hit by natural disaster. A 6-member Council of Admirals oversees the Alliance Defence Force. It is accountable to the Assembly, but does not require its approval before taking action. This freedom of decision-making prevents urgent military action being delayed by tedious debate. The Alliance. Culture and values. Cooperation, mutual aid, tolerance, and respect. The values that bind the Alliance systems also hold true on an interpersonal level. Just as the different worlds of the Alliance formally recognize one another's legitimacy and value, individuals are generally reluctant to show prejudice against others and will band together to help those in genuine need. Diversity is strength. Members of the Alliance are not obliged to conform to what they consider the corporate saturation of federal culture or the status-obsessed posturing of the Imperials. Individual systems are encouraged to preserve and celebrate their own cultural identities. This approach results in a rich variety of artistic, literary, and dramatic output. Free to speak, free to protest. One curious cultural constant across the Alliance member systems is the way the citizens indulge their freedom to complain. They can criticize their governments without fear of repression, and they frequently do so. Previous experience of exploitation has left many citizens cynical, but possessed of a certain mordant humor and a willingness to take life as it comes. The Thargoids. Communication. The belief that Thargoids were capable of some form of extrasensory communication was often cited in the early years of human-Thargoid interaction. But the Alliance. Diplomatic relations. The Federation. Alliance attitudes to the Federation vary sharply, depending on whether one is asking about the Federation's government or its citizenry. The government is seen as a hidebound relic, unable to arrest its slow decline into decadence, but the general populace are much more compassionately viewed. An Alliance citizen, proud of his or her own emancipation, is likely to have a rather condescending view of a federal citizen. They are characterized as ignorant dupes, kept satiated by mass-market entertainment and branded consumer goods. This is not seen as their fault, however. On the contrary, it is widely held that the Federation and the corporate barons deliberately keep the people in this servile state. The Alliance is more interested in enticing federal systems to join its union, thereby winning the moral war, than in exacting vengeance for the wrongs of the past. There has been too much violence already. The Empire. To the Alliance, the Empire is anathema. With its monolithic culture, veneration of opulence, disdain for human rights, and tolerance of slavery, it could not be further from the Alliance's values of mutual respect and freedom from exploitation. Yet, for all this, many Alliance members would rather deal with the Empire than the Federation. The common belief is that the Federation will always pretend to be something it is not. At least with the Empire, you know what you're dealing with. Most Alliance citizens view the emergence of a progressive movement within the Empire with cynicism. Everyone knows that the Empire is incapable of changing its ways. The whole Imperial social model is an imitation of the past. But some in the Alliance nevertheless welcome the ascension of the first female Emperor. The edifice may not be about to crumble, but such a profound change cannot be ignored. The Thargoids. Human Thargoid contact. The Thargoids are a non-human race with a history of hostility towards humanity. The first recorded encounter with a Thargoid ship took place in 2849, although earlier undocumented encounters are believed to have taken place. In the years that followed, contact with lone Thargoid vessels was intermittently reported. Humanity clashed with the Thargoids in the 32nd century, but details of the conflict remained scarce for many years, and it proved difficult to differentiate authentic accounts of Thargoid encounters from the sensationalist media stories of the time. The discovery of abandoned intergalactic Naval Reserve arm bases in 3303 did much to dispel the fog, however. The INRA, a joint federal imperial initiative established in 3193, was responsible for researching the Thargoids and developing technologies to counter their aggression. The organization's lack of accountability meant that the details of its research did not come to light until years after its death.
Core Dynamic, Romeo Alpha Victor, this is Federal Flight Control. Request docking if you wish to land. Permission authorized. Assigned to landing pad 19er. Automated docking assist is now in progress.
From INRA facilities. This data, originally deemed highly confidential, was declassified in 3304, following a resolution from the federal government and an imperial decree. Some controversy over the backing and funding of the INRA remains, however. The Thargoids Society. The INRA discovered that Thargoid society is organized into hives, with most Thargoids falling into three categories: queens, princesses, and drones. Queens function as reproducers, while drones serve to maintain a favorable environment for the rest of the hive. Thargoid hives can be vast, although it may be that some of the larger observed groups are in fact multiple, overlapping hives. Ultimately, little is known for sure. The average
Landing gear deployed.
Thargoid queen is at least as intelligent as a human being, while the typical drone possesses a more rudimentary level of intelligence. Existing evidence suggests that queens have extremely long lifespans, living for hundreds or even thousands of years. The variable size of queens' neurocraniums
Touchdown. Ship secured.
suggests this might be an indicator of age. Little is known about the precise nature of Thargoid reproduction, but it is likely that queens can reproduce both sexually, without queens, and asexually. It is thought that the latter method produces drones, while the former produces a new queen. Analysis of Thargoid specimens led some INRA researchers to believe that a new queen,
Incoming message.
or princess, becomes a full queen only once it has produced drones of its own. Significantly, queens are believed to be single-sex. The Thargoids' ability to reproduce asexually means that their populations can expand incredibly quickly, but it is thought that they deliberately restrict the size of the populace so as to not to deplete all available resources. There is evidence to suggest that this is sometimes achieved by culling older drones. INRA testing indicated that queens perceive drones as entirely expendable, presumably due to the ease with which they can be replaced. Indeed, a Thargoid queen appears to give no more thought to the loss of a drone than a human would an eyelash. The Thargoids. Communication. The belief that Thargoids were capable of some form of extrasensory communication was often cited in the early years of human-Thargoid interaction, but prior to the discovery of INRA records, it was not fully understood. Professor Yuri Anderson of the INRA theorized that a Thargoid queen can communicate with the drones in its hive via a spread-spectrum electronic signal, and can use this signal to control the drones, and even to share their sensory input. Studies of battlefield footage certainly suggest some kind of near-instantaneous communication among Thargoids, and the presence of low-level radio noise in areas occupied by Thargoids indicates that they do indeed communicate via short-range electronic signals. Professor Anslow went on to claim that a queen could effectively see and hear through its drones, but her contemporaries were skeptical, dismissing the assertion as baseless. Professor Ishmael Palin, one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the Thargoids, has even gone so far as to denounce Anslow as a glory hound. Thargoids have been known to make staccato clicking noise in the presence of humans, punctuated with occasional hisses and buzzes. They've also been observed directing such noises at one another, albeit much less frequently. Professor Albert Tesreau, a founding member of the Joint Superpower Initiative, AEGIS, and a specialist in interspecies communication, has studied INRA audio logs and suggested that the sounds probably represent some kind of language due to the repetition of certain sound combinations. It is unclear why the Thargoids would sometimes choose to communicate with each other vocally, given their capacity for extrasensory communication. Professor Anslow suggested that the sounds could be designed to intimidate enemies or opponents, noting that Thargoids often produce them prior to combat. Thargoid ships have been observed emitting a complex array of sounds, and in some cases subtly changing color. The exact meaning of these behaviors has not been determined, but they appear to correspond to different emotional states. What is not known is if these sounds are produced by the pilot and amplified by the ship, or emitted by the ship itself. If the sounds originate with the pilot, it would suggest some kind of physiological connection between pilot and vessel. Given the sophistication of Thargoid bioengineering, however, it is possible that the sounds come from the ship itself, and that Thargoid ships are able to feel and communicate to a limited degree. The hulls of Thargoid ships are typically emblazoned with one of several symbols, the meaning of which is unknown. Some have theorized that they could denote membership of a particular familial group, or possibly be an indicator of rank. The Thargoids. Physiology. Human understanding of Thargoid physiology is far from complete, but recovered INRA data has offered some insights into their nature. INRA records describe the average Thargoid as physically larger than a human being, and generally insectoid in appearance. Thargoid biology is carbon-based, using an RNA-like encoding for biological information, but Thargoid chemistry is based on ammonia rather than water. Consequently, while Thargoids can comfortably tolerate environments as cold as -80°C, they cannot withstand environments warmer than 45°C for long. According to notes compiled by Dr. Peregrine Hennig, an INRA researcher, Thargoids can survive for a significant time in a vacuum of space without apparent discomfort, and can tolerate radiation and extreme cold for far longer than a human. The Thargoids. Vulnerabilities. In 3250, the INRA developed a biological weapon known as the mycoid virus for use against the Thargoids. The virus was the result of an accidental discovery made by an INRA researcher, who noted that a particular strain of fungus was found to thrive on the hulls of Thargoid vessels, and appeared to be digesting the material of which the ship was made. The INRA refined the fungal strain and began experimenting on living Thargoids in their spacecraft. The mycoid proved to have deleterious effects on both, leading to the swift elimination of the Thargoids active in human-occupied space at the time. It is widely assumed that since the last human-Thargoid conflict, the Thargoids have developed an immunity to the mycoid virus. The Thargoids. Starships. In terms of structure and function, Thargoid vessels are radically different from anything produced by humanity, and are able to navigate hyperspace in ways that are not fully understood. They are also at least partly organic, meaning that they can self-repair or heal over time. Ship function in general, and this restorative ability in particular, have been shown to be dependent upon the so-called Thargoid heart, a biomechanical organ found in varying quantities in different Thargoid ships. These hearts often survive the destruction of the ship, enabling them to be salvaged, although they can also be targeted and damaged with appropriate weaponry. They are highly corrosive, however, and require special containers for safe transport. Thargoid vessels that have sustained combat damage exhibit scar-like patterns. Given that Thargoid technology is sophisticated enough for such damage to be repaired, it follows that the Thargoids might deliberately choose to preserve these scars. INRA logs document an encounter with a Thargoid mothership many times larger than other Thargoid craft, against which the mycoid virus was successfully deployed, although no such vessels have been reported in recent times. The Thargoids. Structures. Dozens of planets in human-occupied space are peppered with Thargoid barnacles, biological resource extractors that convert minerals into meta-alloys, a key component in the creation of Thargoid vehicles and technology. Theories that these barnacles have been genetically engineered by the Thargoids have yet to be verified. Larger structures, referred to as Thargoid surface sites, have also been discovered. These sites typically consist of a spiral-shaped structure, nestling within a shallow crater, beneath which lies a series of tunnels. At the heart of this subsurface network is a device that, once activated, emits a holographic star map. The sites are patrolled by semi-sentient biomechanical entities called scavengers. The Thargoids. War with the Guardians. Archaeological records have revealed that the extinct, non-human civilization known as the Guardians experienced conflict with the Thargoids many thousands of years ago. Logs recovered from Guardian sites indicate that the Thargoids were the aggressor in this conflict. Having seeded Guardian space with biomechanical constructs used for resource extraction long before the emergence of the Guardian civilization, the Thargoids apparently believed they were entitled to uncontested dominion of the territory. The Guardians attempted to communicate with the Thargoids and reach a compromise, but without success. Over the course of the conflict, the Guardians developed new technologies to give them an advantage against the Thargoids. These technologies were apparently successful, forcing the Thargoids to abandon their offensive. The Thargoids. Agenda. Thargoids do not attack indiscriminately, and their choice of targets shows them to be highly intelligent. They have also conducted targeted strikes on Aegis facilities and attacked pilots carrying Thargoid items in their cargo holds, indicating that they know they are being studied and want to hold
Landing coupler disengaged. Clear for egress.
Listed a meaningful communication.
Landing gear retracted.
The engineer Ramtar, who has extensively researched the Guardians and their war with the Thargoids, holds the view that Thargoid aggression is a product of territorialism. They seed an area with barnacles, thus laying claim to it, and return, sometimes many centuries later, to harvest the extracted resources. Any life resistant to for the territory is treated as an enemy and summarily attacked. Professor Palin concurs with this view, adding that the Thargoids are apparently so determined to eliminate any threats to their long-term survival, they will not tolerate any advanced species in close proximity. The Guardians. Introduction. The Guardians were a non-human race that occupied a large area of space several million years ago. At its height, the Guardian civilization was technologically superior
Frameshift drive charging.
to human civilization of the 33rd century, and occupied an area of roughly equivalent size. The Guardians
All clear. FSB out.
dueled
4, 3, 2,
the spacefaring civilization for at least 8,000 years before being destabilized by a lengthy civil war. The surviving Guardians were then destroyed by artificially intelligent machines of their own creation. The galaxy contains the ruins of dozens of Guardian settlements, and data logs recovered from
fuel scooping.
these sites have allowed humanity to compile a remarkably detailed picture of Guardian society. The Guardians. Early history. The Guardian Society originally consisted of groups of pack hunters who banded together for mutual protection before organizing themselves into clans. Even at this stage, the Guardians were highly intelligent, and they developed sophisticated hunting strategies that quickly saw them become their planet's apex predator. The Guardians' nascent civilization consisted of two discrete ethnic groups, one based primarily in the south of the planet and one in the north. As these groups expanded, they began to encroach on each other's territory, leading to a conflict that quickly blossomed into civil war. The Northern Clan, despite being the smaller of the two groups, overcame their enemy swiftly and with minimal bloodshed, bringing the entirety of the Guardian civilization under their
Fuel scooping complete.
leadership. In the centuries that followed, the Guardian society developed rapidly. Despite their warlike instincts, the Guardians possessed a remarkable capacity for collaboration and compromise. Their willingness to defer immediate gains in favor of lasting societal benefits allowed them to establish a stable, mutually cooperative society that was to remain peaceful and prosperous for thousands of years. The Guardians. Technological era. Although the Guardian society was in many ways a model of social equilibrium, the Guardians were nevertheless at the mercy of an insidious issue: overpopulation. As their civilization grew and the amount of available land and resources dwindled, the Guardians set their sights on interplanetary colonization. By this time, the Guardians had developed a rudimentary form of space travel, but as the pressures of overpopulation became more acute, the rate of technological progress accelerated, and the Guardians' imperfect starships were soon supplanted by fast, powerful spacefaring vessels. In the centuries that followed, the Guardian civilization expanded rapidly, eventually coming to occupy a region equal to that inhabited by present-day humanity. The Guardians' next major development was the creation of an interstellar communication system known as the Monolith Network. In addition to functioning as a comprehensive cultural archive, the network allowed those connected to it to freely and instantaneously share knowledge and ideas. The connection to the network was dependent on the use of neural implants, and some of the Guardians were uneasy about this fusion of biological and non-biological. The Guardians. War with the Thargoids. Tens of thousands of years earlier, when the Guardians were still a non-spacefaring race, a group of Thargoids entered what would later become Guardian space, looking for new systems to colonize. In addition to earmarking several systems containing ammonia worlds, they prepared a number of planets for occupation. resources from the planet and transform them into resources more useful to the Thargoids. For the Thargoids, seeding a planet
Docking request granted.
was an important step in preparing the end for operation. The Thargoids did not return to these systems for thousands of years, and when they did, they discovered that a new race had occupied them, the Guardians. The Thargoids promptly attacked, due to their innate territorialism. The Guardians responded with a partial retreat, but they also started trying to find ways to communicate with the Thargoids, hoping to determine the cause of their aggression,
Landing gear deployed.
and perhaps negotiate a truce. After considerable effort, they succeeded in acquiring sufficient understanding of the Thargoids' language to determine the invaders' intent.
Docking successful. Engines disengaged.
But they were unable to convince the Thargoids they bore them no ill will, and the Thargoids were unshakable in their belief that they must repel any race that posed a potential threat. The Guardians were left with no choice but to defend themselves militarily. At first, they deployed soldiers, but they quickly realized that drones and other mechanized defenses would be more effective against such a physically formidable enemy. Within a relatively short period of time, the Guardians' war machines became highly sophisticated, able to recognize Thargoid engineering and to operate entirely independently. Similarly, the Thargoids' biomechanical technology was engineered to identify anything of Guardian origin. To this day, many millions of years after the Guardians disappeared, Guardian artifacts are still able to recognize Thargoid technology, and Thargoid technology still reacts negatively to the presence of Guardian artifacts. The Guardians' war machines felt no fear, fatigue, or uncertainty. The Thargoids, meanwhile, had entered Guardian space unprepared for a protracted military campaign, and ultimately they were forced to retreat. For the Guardians, this was cause for celebration, but many still harbored doubts about the rapid rate of technological progress, doubts that the development of sophisticated military hardware had done nothing to alleviate. The Guardians. Final era. For decades, the Guardians have been experimenting with artificial intelligence, but the creation of the Monolith Network and the knowledge sharing it facilitated dramatically accelerated the rate of progress. Soon, the Guardians' experiments bore fruit, resulting in the first fully sentient machines. These constructs were seen as a means to further enhance the Guardians' technological mastery and were integrated into various aspects of their society. New neural implants were developed that connected the Guardians with both the constructs and the Monolith Network in a symbiotic circle. But not everyone was happy with this development. The Guardians had always venerated nature, and many saw this new paradigm as a perversion of natural order. A schism emerged between the nature-teaching tradition
Released. Engines engaged.
and the technologically minded progressives. A schism that widened with alarming speed. Efforts were
Landing gear retracted.
forced the rising tension, but the traditionalists felt irrevocably alienated by the rapid rate of change. The constructs and the Monolith Network became scapegoats for all manner of social ills, and the traditionalists
Frameshift drive charging.
began to clamour for a return to simpler times. Ultimately, the ideological divergence proved insurmountable, and a second civil war erupted, quickly engulfing most of the Guardian stars.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Systems. In its early stages, the war was fought primarily by soldiers, but within a decade, and after a significant loss of life, most of the fighting was conducted remotely. The progressives fought with automated war machines, while the traditionalists relied mostly on biological weapons.
Fuel scooping.
The internecine conflict raged for over 100 years,
Frameshift drive charging.
bringing the Guardian civilization to its knees and retarding further social development. The increasingly zealous traditionalists devoted most of their resources to honoring the dead, exacerbating the problem.
4, 3, 2, 1.
As the Guardian society declined, most withdrew into fortified settlements. Meanwhile, the artificially intelligent constructs were horrified by the destruction unfolding around them. Extracted from the current situation, they determined that even if peace was restored, the Guardians would never be able to transcend
Fuel scooping.
their violent natures. They decided that the only
Fuel scoop disengaged.
way to preclude further violence, while giving the construct's burgeoning society the best possible chance of survival, was to destroy what remained of the Guardian civilization. By this time, the constructs had been given complete control of the Guardians' munitions and automated war machines. Their attack, when it came, was swift and merciless. The strikes were executed with a precision that only a machine race could accomplish. The Guardians were utterly destroyed. The Guardians. Physiology. The Guardians were a bipedal race, and the typical Guardian was taller and more slender than the average human. They had small round eyes, a vestigial nose, and 4 digits on each hand. Their vision was superior to that of humans, while their sense of smell was poorer. Their senses of hearing and touch were roughly equivalent to our own. The Guardians had pinkish red skin, but there was some variation among ethnic groups, with tones ranging from pale pink to deep crimson. They also had serrated bony ridges on the outside of their forearms, which were used as weapons during their early history, when they were still semi-primitive pack hunters. The Guardians' environmental needs were broadly similar to those of humans. Their homeworld was warmer and had lower gravity than most Earth-like worlds. And when they began to colonize other planets, they typically favored ones that shared these qualities. The Guardians had 2 genders and reproduced sexually. Procreation was a matter of personal choice, but each individual was obligated to be a parent at least once in their life to ensure the continuation of their genetic line. The average gestation period was around 300 days, and infants were effectively helpless for a period after birth. Much like human young, infants were raised in communal creches rather than by their parents, in keeping with the collaborative philosophies that underpinned Guardian society. The Guardians. Society. The Guardians' social constructs were the key not only to their rapid development, but also to the stability that defined the halcyon days of their civilization. Although the Guardians had a natural tendency towards collaboration, it was not until the end of the First Civil War that this tendency had a measurable impact on their society. The social reorganization that followed the war included the creation of statutes that defined not only individuals' rights, but also their responsibilities to each other. As the Guardian society developed, further laws were passed that required individuals to participate in socially progressive activities, from caring for the young to conducting scientific research. These responsibilities were supported by the state, which made education and information freely available to all. For most of their history, the Guardians had no formal faith, but the creation of the Monolith Network precipitated the emergence of a nature religion that decried the veneration of technology. Although this religion had its roots in the Guardians' long-standing reverence for the natural world, it quickly became a radical movement, violently opposed to the use of neural implants and other advanced technologies. Ultimately, however, this new religion was to endure for only a short period, its existence cut short by the destruction of the Guardian society. The Guardians. Technology. The Guardians' pre-industrial history was in many ways similar to that of the human race, with the development of tools and agriculture proving central to their development. But one respect in which they differed was in their understanding of biological engineering. The practice of selective breeding in order to eliminate or promote certain genetic traits began before the First Civil War, and as the Guardian society progressed, their skill as genetic engineers developed in step. After the war, the Guardians developed the ability to enhance their immune systems to guard against infection, and engineered specific microorganisms to eliminate biological threats. Genetic manipulation also played a part in prenatal care, which involved the removal of hereditary diseases and other undesirable conditions prior to birth. The Guardians were an ecologically conscientious people who assiduously avoided the use of rockets and fossil fuels. Their first spacecraft lacked any form of internal propulsion and were fired into space with electromagnetic launchers. Pilots and passengers were cocooned inside bubbles of breathable gel, which protected them from G-forces of launch and doubled as hibernation pods during long journeys. When it came to warfare, the Guardians relied initially on the blade-like protrusions on their forearms, and later on simple weapons like spears and bows. As they entered the technological era, they developed electromagnetic projectile weapons, utilizing the same technology they used to launch their first spacecraft. They also developed extremely effective shields, capable of protecting entire cities, and even of withstanding orbital bombardment. At that time, however, large-scale conflict was virtually unheard of, and it was not until the conflict with the Thargoids that further military innovations were made. The Guardian's Second Civil War was fought principally with bespoke biological weapons employed by the Traditionalists and automated war machines used by the Progressives. The shields that protected the Guardian cities were unable to resist these new weapons, forcing many of the Guardians to withdraw into heavily fortified settlements. But the Guardians' most significant technological achievements were unarguably the creation of the Monolith Network and the development of artificial intelligence. The use of neural implants to connect the Guardians with their creations could have ushered in a whole new era of scientific and technological discovery, but unfortunately, these innovations were to lead only to the Guardians' destruction. The Guardians. Language. The Guardians shared a single language, with only minor regional variations, and even after they colonized other planets, they continued to share a common tongue. The Guardians had three primary forms of communication: a spoken language, a gestural language, and a written language. Their spoken language emerged first, followed by a gestural language that allowed them to communicate silently while hunting. This sign language formed the basis of their written language. Consequently, while their written and gestural languages correlated closely, their spoken language was largely distinct. The Guardian's spoken language was used principally to communicate emotional concepts and played a central role in social bonding, while their written language was used mainly to communicate formal and practical ideas. Significantly, their written language was logographic, meaning the words and phrases were represented by single characters. The Guardians. Human-Guardian contact. In 3301, the Federal presidential vessel, Starship One, suffered catastrophic drive failure during a tour of Frontier Systems, resulting in the ship's destruction. Jasmina Halsey, at that time the Federal president, was left drifting in an escape pod, unconscious. During this period of stasis, Halsey believed she was visited by transdimensional beings of extraordinary intelligence and compassion. Later, when she was rescued and revived, she was left with the conviction that this experience had been real and not merely a hallucination. Halsey proceeded to experience visions of mysterious alien worlds and cities, dense metropolises full of activity and life. She shared these visions with the rest of humanity, prompting explorers to set off in search of these undiscovered planets. This led to the discovery of the first Guardian ruins in the Sinuev XRH D11102 system. The fact that these sites were devoid of life led to speculation that Halsey had seen the Guardian worlds not as they are, but as they had been. In the months that followed, several further sites were found. The engineer Ramtar started researching the Guardians, and eventually succeeded in developing a decryption algorithm that could decode Guardian data, leading to a much deeper understanding of their lost civilization. Since then, other engineers have leveraged Ramtar's discoveries to develop Guardian human technology. Individuals. Aidan Tannen.
Our species has been banding together to fight the outsider since we lived in caves. We stand against the lawless, the invaders, and the monsters. And we're proud to do it. But you have to remember one thing. Nobody in the history of conflict ever saw himself as a monster. Everyone believes they're the hero of their own story. If you can't understand that, if you can't stand in the enemy's shoes, even for a second, and ask yourself why he thinks he needs to kill you, then you don't know what it means to be a soldier.
Aidan Tanner, addressed to Federal Cadets, 3298. Admiral Aidan Tanner is a senior officer in the Federal Navy. He has served for more than 4 decades, and in 3303 was given significant responsibility in the struggle against the Thargoids, first being appointed to Chief of Federal Security and later to Chief Military Liaison for the Cross Superpower Initiative, Aegis. He is widely respected, even outside of federal space, for his conscientious and level-headed approach to conflict. Born in 3254, Tanner was expected to follow in the footsteps of his authoritarian father by becoming a doctor, but instead enlisted in the Federal Navy, along with a group of friends, in what he would later describe as a rash act of adolescent rebellion that I have not once regretted. Tanner's father died in 3277. The two never resolved their estrangement. Tanner's early naval career was anything but distinguished. Known to his comrades in arms as Spoonie for his habit of eating directly from food packets instead of using plates, he was distinguished more by his irreverent sense of humor than his competence. 6 months in, Tanner was found to be responsible for a scurrilous newsletter that satirized several senior officers, including Sergeant Burke Hazel, who was offended and deeply hurt. Hazel had taken a personal interest in Tanner and had encouraged him to persist when the cadet had struggled with basic training. Tanner's defense that he had been trying to improve morale was rejected, and although he was allowed to continue his service, he was marked as a potential insubordinate, a label that would later return to haunt him. Tanner's chief instructional officer, Commander Myra Dunstock, warned him to take military life more seriously. She took Tanner to a refugee facility, an experience he would later characterize as showing him what the military is there to prevent. Tanner recognized a last chance when he saw it, discarded his role as camp comedian, and threw himself into his training with unprecedented energy. The decisive incident in Tanner's career was the Autolycus Mutiny of 3271. At the time, Tanner was serving as Chief Gunnery Officer on board the FDN Autolycus, a Farragut-class battlecruiser, under the command of Captain Jaden Horn. The ship was dispatched to restore order at Cold Harbor. Which had been occupied by rebels, following a descent into civil disorder. Captain Horn's orders were to
Core Dynamics, Romeo Alpha Victor. This is Federal Flight Control. Request docking if you wish to land. Permission authorized. Proceed to landing pad 16. Automated docking assist is now in progress.
Last, he became convinced an attack was imminent. Surveillance footage later showed Horn acting in an increasingly erratic fashion. He screamed orders, slurred his words, and struck an ensign for making a minor mistake. Seeing a group of civilian ships preparing to leave the station, Horn ordered Tanner to open fire. Convinced.
Moderate traffic in this sector. Make way for larger vessels.
They were about to ram the Autolycus. Tanner refused to obey the order, claiming it was unlawful and that Horn was unfit to command. In the time it took for a furious Horn to have Tanner thrown in the brig, the escaping ships had jumped out of the system.
Landing gear deployed.
At Tanner's court-martial, Horn tried to use his history of rebelliousness against him, but an explosive series of revelations followed.
Landing successful. Systems offline.
The escaping ships had been carrying evacuees, and the station's apparent silence was in fact due to Horn himself, who had disabled shipboard communications without telling his crew. Horn, who it would later emerge had been suffering from lexalamine-induced psychosis, committed suicide mid-trial by
Cargo hold at maximum capacity.
hijacking a fighter and detonating a grenade inside the cockpit. Tanner was exonerated, receiving the commendation of President Antonia Madison for his actions. Individuals.
Ship detach complete. Clear for egress.
Landing gear retracted.
My grandfather had an heirloom he used to keep in our winter palace. It was a priceless marble statuette of one of our ancestors standing with his foot on a woman's neck, while she looks up at him in fear or adoration, probably both. I loathed it. It was commissioned to commemorate some victory or other, but that wasn't the point of the thing. The message was clear, and it's the same one I've heard all my life. Deep down, the people we dominate are happy to be dominated.
Frameshift drive charging.
When I was 6 years old, I smashed it. The servants came running. My father stormed down the stairs in his gown. He asked if it was an accident.
4, 3, 2, 1.
There was such a strange look in his eyes. I knew that if I said yes, nobody would argue. Nothing more would be said. But I didn't. I stamped my foot and said, "No, Daddy. I did it on purpose."
Fuel scooping.
It's the same with tradition. The people who pass it on think it's precious. They expect you to cherish it and pass it on in turn. But what they think
Fuel scoop disengaged.
doesn't matter, because the responsibility rests with you. If you know it's wrong, then you have to smash it. On purpose.
Aisling Duval. A fireside chat with Serena, 3301. Princess Aisling Duval, born in 3276, is a prominent member of the Imperial royal family. The eldest child of the infamous Prince Harold, she had a troubled upbringing. Her father was notorious for his hedonistic lifestyle, while her mother, entertainer Imogen Eccentrica Gabriellini, died from an aneurysm shortly after Aisling's birth. The autopsy identified the cause of death as an overdose of purple sunflower, an obscure and expensive narcotic. The conspiracy theorists insisted that she was murdered to remove an embarrassment to the royal family. Aisling has indicated that she is aware of these rumors, but has never commented on them. Despite living a life of great privilege, Aisling has publicly embraced the cause of the less fortunate and become an outspoken opponent of slavery, something that has made her the target of fierce criticism from more traditionalist imperials. But despite this criticism, Aisling is a popular figure with a widespread media presence. Her campaigning has brought definite benefits to many of the poorest in imperial society, and gone some way towards easing tensions between the Empire and the Federation. Her critics, however, dismiss her as a puppet, doing the bidding of a shadowy circle of advisors. They claim there is no underlying coherence to Aisling's policies. To them, she is a naive and sentimental child, without the necessary experience for politics, backing one populist cause after another. It's conscious of how her activism is affecting morale. Significantly, the most savage of Aisling's critics and the staunchest of her defenders
Docking request granted.
is no real counterpart to this. Moral purity is nothing but a front, carefully created in collusion with the very advisors others believe are exploiting them. The people's princess, they argue, is exceptionally good at being underestimated. Following the death of Hengist Duval in 3301, Aisling was considered by many to be a viable contender for the imperial throne. As Aisling was born out of wedlock, however, and her father was removed from the line of succession on the grounds of mental incapacity, Arissa Lavinia Duval
Landing gear deployed.
was deemed to have the stronger claim. Individuals, Albert Esro.
Docking successful. Engines disengaged.
I may not be religious, but I still have faith. Not the kind my parents have. In fact, I don't think that desperate devotion can even be called faith. The point of faith is that it's tested. And if you insist that your beliefs are above criticism or analysis like the star cults do, you're refusing to allow your faith to be tested at all. What do I have faith in? ambiguity that emerges when understanding fails. I believe intelligent life will naturally tend towards cooperation rather than conflict, not because there's a higher power guiding our decisions, but because that's simply the most logical course. And yes, our recent experiences with the Thargoids have tested that faith harshly.
Albert Tesreau. Professor Albert Tesreau is an Imperial scientist, an affiliate of the Achenar Research Council, and a founding member of the Joint Superpower Initiative Aegis, which was established in August 3303 to investigate the Thargoid menace. She currently serves as Aegis's head of research. Tesreau's biological parents were members of the Besmeratu cult, an isolationist group secreted within a sealed compound that believed itself to have been chosen for salvation by non-human beings. The cult's charismatic leader, Anton Hotep, claimed humanity had been under the protection of these beings for millennia, that he was their cosmic messiah, and that only the believers would be saved from the coming apocalypse. In support of these claims, he often produced alien artifacts, allegedly sourced from archaeological digs that other cult members were never permitted to examine closely. Alba was marked as a troublemaker from an early age, due to her heretical belief in rationality and the scientific method. She was formally banished from Besmeratu after she sabotaged the air purifying system, forcing the compound to call for help from outsiders and thus humiliating Hotep. After her story became public knowledge, she was adopted into the household of Senator Olivia Tesreau
Cargo hold at maximum capacity.
of Achenar and awarded a scholarship to study at Grand Imperial, alongside the children of the nobility. She wrote her master's thesis on the potential uses of mathematics as a link fragment between human beings and intelligent non-humans. She is passionately interested in non-human intelligence and meaningful discourse between species, despite the counterfeit alien intelligence.
Ship released. Engines engaged. Landing gear retracted.
She is determined to do whatever she can to act as a bridge between human and non-human cultures. Individuals are on delay.
Frameshift drive charging.
I'll tell you, Delane is the most trustworthy cuss you could ever work with. Why? Because he always makes good on his threats. Anyone else tells you that they're gonna cut off your index finger?
4, 3, 2, 1.
Using to hammer them into your sinuses with your own severed foot? You know it's just bluster. But if Delane tells you that, you know he'll do exactly what he says. To the letter. Wants people to be afraid of him. He keeps his promises. You gotta respect that.
Fuel scooping.
Mental health. Arms trader. Archon Delane is the head of the Cuban Group, a powerful criminal syndicate. He refers
Frameshift drive charging.
to himself as the Pirate King, a title not recognized by any government. Delane's early life is not documented, and there are competing legends of his origin. Some believe he grew up
4, 3, 2, 1.
in a drug den on one of the frontier worlds where he learned to fight. Other stories have him working as a bouncer in the brothel where he was born, or training as a grease monkey at an orbital shipyard that hosted clandestine for hours. What is certain is that Delane challenged and slaughtered the reigning pirate
Fuel scooping.
in Cuba when he was only 15. The
Fuel
title
scoop disengaged.
of Pirate Lord is only transferred on the death of the incumbent, either to a nominated successor or to the victor of a ritual challenge. According to tradition, the Pirate Lord must honor any challenge to his leadership, regardless of who issues it, although the choice of weapons is left to him. In Delane's case, Pirate Lord Crab opted for a bare hands contest, a highly unusual choice. It has been suggested that Crab saw Delane as a weak target due to his albinism, unworthy of the Pirate Lord's personal attention. It is possible that Crab intended to give Delane a beating rather than kill him outright. If so, it was a fatal act of mercy. Footage of the fight shot by onlookers shows Delane deftly evading Crab's heavy blows, allowing the larger man to tire himself out before delivering a sudden jab to Crab's eye. Delane then battered Crab into submission, continuing to pummel the body until it was unrecognizable. The Cumo crew immediately split, dividing itself into those who saw Delane as a legitimate leader and those who refused to follow an unproven youth. The rift was soon closed, however, as Delane proved himself as capable a leader as he was a fighter. It became clear that Delane intended to establish not only his own reputation, but that of the crew. From then on, Delane crushed any dissent with the same uncompromising brutality he had shown to Crab. He took a zero-tolerance approach to the petty squabbles that had previously paralyzed the Cumo crew, and in doing so, turned what had been an anarchic band of opportunists into a lethally effective raiding force. United in purpose and more organized than ever before, the Cumo crew quickly became the terror of the Pegasus sector, absorbing lesser pirate gangs, raiding civilian stations with impunity, and taking over corporate facilities. In Delane's early years of leadership, many rival pirate lords demanded the right to one-on-one combat, each of them convinced that they would be the one to strike him down and take over his enviable criminal empire. Delane met each challenger in turn, agreed to their choice of weapons, and promptly dispatched them. After the death of Pirate Lord Horvath, who Delane strangled with his own razor whip, there were no further challenges. Delane and his Cumo crew rule by fear, but they operate according to strict rules. If a settlement in Cumo territory has paid its tribute, any Cumo pirate foolish enough to raid it risks being stripped of his rank, his crew, his possessions, his skin, and his life, according to the severity of the offense. These are the infamous 5 strippings, instigated by Delane as a standard punishment across Cumo territory. Individuals, Arissa Vinny Devon.
I am a daughter, not just of the Emperor, but of the Empire.
Docking request granted.
And I look upon our traditions and achievements with pride. I hold, as my forefathers did, that to be born imperial is to receive the blessings of the universe. That is the true meaning of the ceremonial wine tipped upon our new worlds. Does this pride in our heritage make me old-fashioned? Some would say so.
Landing gear deployed.
I know that there are those in my family who cannot bear the burden of rank and privilege without a chronic sting.
Docking successful. Engines disengaged.
Guilt. But I ask that you look charitably upon those so ailing, as I do. After all, rebellion is the prerogative of adolescence. I ask that you reserve your anger for a worthier target. For those who acknowledge our traditions in public, but privately serve only their own corrupt interests. For those who exploit their ancestors' sacrifices while holding our military in contempt. For all the petty, venal, spineless parasites in our very midst. I have sat with many such parasites, and for form's sake, I have masked my contempt. But that mask has served its purpose, and now I cast it aside. To the worms nestling so complacently in the heart of my beloved empire, I say this. We see you, and we are coming for you.
Arissa Lavinie Duval, private speech given at her post-coronation dinner. Arissa Lavinie Duval is the reigning emperor, having been appointed to the position by the Imperial Senate, and a direct descendant of the first emperor, Henson Duval. Her father was originally thought to be the late Prince Aristide de Lavinie, but Arissa's claim to be the illegitimate daughter of Emperor Hengist Duval has since been ratified by DNA testing. Arissa distinguished herself as a serving senator early in life. Unlike other senators who took their patron support for granted or left the work of intercession to a delegated representative, Arissa made a point of visiting and speaking directly with her patrons. Foremost among her concerns was how little scope for mobility the Empire offered. In theory, it was possible to rise in rank, but in reality, power was hoarded and loyal service went unrewarded. To her mother's horror, Arissa proceeded to go undercover as a slave in the Lagany household on Achenar, talking to the staff and listening in on meetings. What she learned would change her view of the Empire forever. The rules could be broken with impunity, so long as the proper bribes were paid. A senator's favor could be secured, a corporation's accounts could be doctored, and an atrocity could be covered up for the right price. On paper, it might be a patronage system, but it operated as a de facto plutocracy. Arissa's experience as a slave also cemented her own view of imperial slavery, namely that it was no worse than indentured servitude, and downright luxurious compared to what the Federation's lowest paid workers had to endure. Non-imperial commentators responded by pointing out that slaves in noble households on Achenar could hardly be held up as typical examples of slavery, and that Arissa might have learned more had she spent her time in a Mastopolos mining facility. Arissa has made no secret of her determination to restore the rule of law within the Empire. She means to purge it of corruption and has received widespread public support for this cause. Unlike her niece, Aisling Duval, she sees the Empire system as inherently worthy, if impeded by long-term neglect. They need to be cleansed, not torn down and rebuilt, as per Aisling's wishes. As the first woman to serve as Emperor, Arissa is a controversial figure to many, regardless of her personal political stance. Many hardcore traditionalists within the Empire have vowed to depose her and replace her with a ruler more to their liking. Individuals. Denton Patrius.
What disgusts me? That's a perceptive question. By asking it, you reveal that you consider me a man of taste. If you'd asked me what I hated, I'm not sure I could have hidden my disappointment at such a banal question. But disgust, that deserves an answer. It's jealousy that most disgusts me. It's such a petty, self-defeating emotion. I see it every day. Most men look at me and think, I want what he has. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 thinks, how can I achieve what he achieved? Now, he's not jealous, he's motivated. Who knows, we might work together one day. But most men are not like that. They have the desire, but not the initiative. It's like a dog watching you eat and wishing he was a human. And that's the tragic thing about jealous people. They think they hate me, but really, they hate themselves. Because deep in their hearts, they know they're too lazy to fight for their dreams.
Denton Patrius, a fireside chat with Serena, 3302. Denton Patrius is a powerful Imperial senator and the Admiral of the Imperial Fleet. He is a controversial figure, but deeply unpopular in other quarters for his uncompromising approach to debtors.